Godot 4.7 is finally here, and while it may look like a normal update, it brings some of the best quality of life improvements the engine has seen in years. So let's take a look at the most interesting features and useful upgrades in Godot 4.7, starting with a brand new node that developers have wanted for years, AreaLight3D. This new rectangular light source makes it much easier to create realistic glowing surfaces. Instead of light coming from a single point, it emits light from an entire area, giving you softer shadows and more natural reflections. So whether you are creating a glowing monitor, a window, or an LED panel, you no longer need a bunch of workarounds to fake the effect. Just drop in an AreaLight3D and let Godot handle it. After this, we have HDR support on Windows, macOS, iOS, visionOS, and Linux. HDR or High Dynamic Range is a way for games and videos to show brighter lights, darker shadows, and better colors at the same time. This is SDR and this is HDR. You might not notice the difference here on YouTube, but trust me bro, the HDR one looks way better in real life. Unreal and Unity both already support HDR output, but Godot was missing this feature for a long time. But now, with Godot 4.7, HDR support finally comes to almost all major platforms. And you might notice Android is missing here. That's because Android HDR support is still being worked on. But honestly, this is a huge step for Godot. Then there's official virtual joystick support. If you have ever made a mobile game in Godot before, you probably know the pain of setting up touch controls. You either install plugins or spend hours writing your own joystick system. But now, Godot 4.7 adds built-in joystick support. There are 3 modes available. The fixed joystick stays in one position, the dynamic joystick appears at the initial touch position and goes back when released, and the following joystick also starts at the touch position. But if your finger moves outside its range, it follows your input and then returns to its original position when released. This is really a big improvement for anyone building mobile games. Now, another really cool feature is 2D Scene Painter. Until now, placing multiple instances of a scene wasn't exactly convenient. If you wanted to add dozens of trees, enemies, or decorations to your level, you had to keep dragging and dropping the same scene over and over again, or duplicate nodes one at a time. The new Scene Painter tool makes this process much faster. Instead of manually placing every object, you can simply paint scenes directly into your level, making level design much more efficient. It's also quite flexible. You can enable snapping and adjust step sizes based on your needs. Now, this one is going to be very helpful, especially if you work with UI. Godot 4.7 introduces offset transform of control nodes. As you may know, when a control node is placed inside a container, its transform properties are usually controlled by the container itself. That means things like position, rotation, and scale can't be easily modified or animated without fighting the layout system. But now, Godot adds a new transform offset category that lets you visually offset and animate control nodes while still keeping the container layout intact. This makes it easier to create polished UI animations without breaking your interface layout. Next, we have something called DrawableTexture. This is actually a pretty important addition. Previously, if you wanted to draw directly onto a texture, you either had to use a viewport workaround or deal with the low-level rendering device API, which wasn't exactly beginner-friendly. Thanks to the new DrawableTexture API, Godot now provides a much simpler way to draw on textures without dealing with all the engine complexity. In 3D, we have collider snapping for Path3D. If you have ever worked with Path3D nodes, you may have noticed that placing points can feel a little awkward since they snap to an imaginary plane in front of the camera instead of the actual geometry in your scene. Godot 4.7 adds a new option that lets path points snap directly onto colliders. So, when you are creating roads, racing tracks, or camera paths, points can now be placed exactly on the surfaces you are working with. And if you prefer the old behavior, you can easily toggle this option from the Path3D options menu. But it's not just Path3D that got better snapping support. The 3D editor has finally received Vertex Snapping, a feature developers have been requesting for a long time. This allows you to snap objects directly to nearby vertices, making it much easier to align props, modular assets, and level geometry with precision. To use it, simply hold the B key and select the vertex you want to snap. Once you see the yellow circle, hold the mouse button and move it to the desired location, and that's it. The circle will become green once a vertex to snap is detected. Another small but really useful improvement is the ability to follow moving objects in the 3D editor. By pressing F twice on a selected object, the editor camera will automatically follow the object as it moves around the scene. It even works while playing animations with an animation player or when objects are being moved by a tool script. And if you need to make adjustments, you can still move and transform the object normally while the camera is following it. Next, we have support for copying and pasting entire sections of properties. This is one of my favorite features. There have been many times when I wanted something like this. Instead of manually entering values from one scene to another, like matching transform properties from one node to another, you can simply copy the entire category and paste it into another node. All the values are transferred exactly as they are, a really solid quality of life improvement. Next up, we have a brand new MeshLibrary editor. Editing MeshLibrary resources is now much easier with this dedicated editor. It comes with the following features. Items are displayed in a grid layout with search and zoom capabilities. We can easily edit individual items in the separate inspector. Then there's full undo and redo for all action, and at last there is a fallback preview to an item's mesh if none is explicitly set. Here's how it looks. We have the inspector on the left side for editing items and all the resources displayed on the right. Next, the old asset library is being replaced by the new asset store. The goal here is to make discovering and managing assets much easier. Asset pages have been improved, preview images can now be zoomed, and perhaps most importantly, you can now see asset ratings directly inside the store. This makes it much easier to find high quality plugins, tools, and assets without having to guess which ones are worth using. Now, this update also includes a lot of editor quality of life improvements. For example, you can now search through long pop-up menus using a built-in search bar, making it much easier to find the option you are looking for. Similarly, when adding a new node, you can quickly filter the list to find the exact node you need without scrolling through hundreds of entries. Animation editor nodes are now collapsible, helping you declutter both your screen and your mind when working with complex animations. And in the remote inspector, you will finally see proper enum names instead of the cryptic integer values we are all used to seeing. Then, there's also a new vector measurement tool for the 3D editor ruler. It can display lengths for each axis, making it much easier to measure multiple dimensions at once. Dragging and dropping nodes in the scene tree has also been improved, thanks to a new drop position indicator helping prevent accidental placement in the wrong location. And you can now double click the name of the currently open script at the top of the script editor to instantly reveal it in the script list, which is especially useful when working with large projects containing dozens of scripts. Another small but welcome improvement is that methods, signals, and properties displayed by the editor now use a monospace font. This makes it easier to distinguish code-related elements from the rest of the editor interface. The appearance of the built-in help system has also been improved. And finally, the project manager now highlights version discrepancies. It displays an arrow indicating whether a project needs to be upgraded or downgraded before it can be opened in your current version of Godot. And on the rendering side, there are quite a few improvements as well. For viewports, there's now a nearest neighbor scaling option. This is especially useful for retro-style 3D games or when you are rendering at lower resolution to improve performance while keeping the image nice and crisp. Gradient Texture 2D can now generate conic gradients, giving you more flexibility when creating UI elements, effects, and stylized visuals. Godot also now gives each rendering pass its own unique environment buffer, which helps improve rendering efficiency behind the scenes. The clear coat effect has received several improvements and fixes, making shiny materials look more accurate and consistent. Performance has also been improved for foveated rendering in the Vulkan mobile renderer. And one feature I personally think is really cool is inline previews for text-based shader operations. Instead of constantly guessing what a value or operation is doing, you can see visual previews directly in the shader editor, making shader development much more intuitive. Rich text label images are now often font size aware as well. This means images embedded in the text can automatically scale with the font size. And finally, you can tile atlas textures inside texture rect nodes. There are also some useful gameplay-focused additions too, like CSG nodes now support automatic smoothing, making it easier to create smoother-looking geometry without having to manually tweak normals. Collision Shape 2Ds now support one-way collision to any direction. Previously, one-way collisions only worked from a fixed direction, but now you have much more control over how objects can pass through platforms and other collision shapes. twins have also become more powerful. They can now wait for signals, making it easier to create complex sequences and gameplay logic without writing extra code to synchronize everything. And if you're using 3D particles, you now get additional controls for scale and rotation, giving you more flexibility when creating effects. Platform support has also received several improvements. Export templates can now be downloaded individually, so you only need to install the platforms you are actually targeting instead of downloading everything. Then, controller support on iOS has also been improved, and gyro aiming support is now built in directly into the engine. And most importantly, Godot 4.7 also ships with day one support for latest XR platforms. Android developers also get a bunch of improvements as well. Godot now supports picture-in-picture mode, allowing games and applications to continue running in a small floating window while the user interacts with other apps. The embedded game window can now be moved and resized, providing a more flexible development experience. The script editor now properly supports orientation changes, making it easy to write scripts in portrait mode. Splash screens are now much easier to customize. We can set a custom splash icon, background color, and a branding image. For profiling and performance analysis, Perfetto is now the default tracing tool on Android. And perhaps most interestingly, developers can now implement Java interfaces directly from GDScript, making it easier to integrate with Android-specific APIs and features without needing as much Java code. Linux users aren't left out either. Godot 4.7 introduces initial touch support for Wayland, improving compatibility with touch-enabled Linux devices and making touch interactions work much more reliably than before. And that's still not everything. Godot 4.7 includes hundreds of fixes and improvements that make the engine more polished and enjoyable to use. Let me know which feature is your favorite or if there's something I missed. That's all for this one. I'm Aman and I'll see you in the next one.